All right, thanks you guys for helping me out today. I really appreciate it. Basically what we're going to be doing today, we're just going to be reviewing a little bit about poetry and about poetic devices and about how employed in poetry they help the overall theme and understanding of an individual. I actually brought a copy for each of you. We're going to be analyzing Sonnet 29 by Shakespeare. Have any of you read Sonnet 29?
No, I don't.
Not that you're familiar. That's okay.
It's actually one of my favorites.
It's a good one. We're going to begin first by reading it, and then we're just going to talk about a couple of the poetic devices that are employed. Ones which I'm sure you already know, other ones which you may not know, just to help understand a little bit more. Who would like to volunteer to read it? Perfect, thank you.
Sonnet 29. When in disgrace with fortune in men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least. Yet in these thoughts myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising, from soul and earth sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembrance such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings.
Thank you. This is one of my favorite Shakespearean sonnets personally, and so I'm glad that we're able to do this one. Just a couple things. We're first going to begin talking about form. What the form is of the poetry is how it's written, the way that it's set up, and it's very structured. What this is called is actually called a Shakespearean form, and it's pretty simple. He was the one that basically engineered it himself after so long. It's also called the English sonnet, the English form, because of the fact that Shakespeare is an English poet. So what you guys see that right here can define the form of this. Just looking at it. Well, what things make up the form of the poem?
Alternating rhyming lines.
Exactly, rhyme. Rhyme is one of the things that makes up poetry. What Shakespeare does here is if you can tell the rhyme scheme, you look at it, the first word is the first line ends with eyes, the second one ends with state. Obviously those don't rhyme. So we go on to the third line, which is cries, rhyming with eyes, and the fourth being fate. What that is, it's an A, B, A, B. If you look at it, goes on, obviously fate rhymes with state, but the next word, hope, doesn't rhyme with either state or eyes. So we can look at it this way. It begins A, B, and continues on. The next one would be C, D, C, D. And then E, F, E, F. And what about the last two lines? What's particularly important about those?
They rhyme with each other.
They rhyme with each other. There's no intersecting line between them. And so those would be G, G. This right here is the form, the rhyme scheme of a Shakespearean novel. It will always stick in this exact same format every single time. The other type of, most sonnets are written in either the English or Shakespearean form, just like this, or they're written in a different form, which is called the Petrarchan or Italian form, which goes like this: A, B, B, A, C, D, D, C, so on, so on, so on, down to G, G as well. The importance about this is what it's called, it's divided up into sections. Obviously, each of these being different from each other. A set of four of them is called a quatrain. And when four lines are coupled together, it's called a quatrain. Quad being four. And at the bottom here, what we have is two individual lines coupled by themselves. They're called a heroic couplet. So every single Shakespearean sonnet that you'll ever read is set up this exact same way, with A, B, C, D down to the heroic couplet. And that's the rhyme scheme that's employed here. A couple things that are about it. Do you guys know anything about meter or form in a poem? Okay. Basically, the way it's set up is that the way it's read, even just the way that you read it today, Dave, it's read in a very particular way. The poetry is written to be read. When in disgrace with fortune in men's eyes, I all alone but weep my outcast state. Just the way that you read it, it's supposed to be metered, so that you read it in a correct form. What the meter of the poem that we're reading today is actually, it's called iambic pentameter. Have any of you heard that before?
Yeah.
Good. Do any of you know what that means? No?
Not specifically.
Something
It's like
like
stressed,
that.
unstressed, stressed, unstressed.
Exactly, that's what an iamb is. An iamb is two syllables put together, the first one being unstressed and the second being stressed. So iambic being the first part of it, knowing that we're having unstressed and distressed. So the first one, when in is the correct way to say it. Not when in, disgrace. The way that you read it is important to how the poem is supposed to be read. So it's when in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes. So that's the iamb part. What does pentameter mean? Pent meaning 10. We're going to have in every line of a Shakespearean sonnet, you're going to have 5 coupled syllables, the first one being unstressed, the second being stressed, 10 syllables in every line. We can see it here. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state. You'll notice in several instances throughout the poem as well, like in the line with featured like him with friends possessed. Possessed being its own word, the apostrophe D creates it into one word with one syllable there. So that's an important thing to notice. As well, it's done as well in a later line, the second to last line, with remembered. So that's an important part to remember about all poems. They're all going to be the exact same way. Iambic pentameter is something to remember. Good. Now, going on, a couple other things about poetic devices, or things that you can draw out, like a simile, or a personification, or alliteration, those type of things, which I'm sure you've heard about before. Who can see just a couple things in this poem that we can talk about that help create that imagery, the idea of what the poem is? Does anybody know what diction is? We'll first talk about diction. Diction is word choice and the meaning of a word, both the denotation and the connotation of the word. If we look at the first quatrain, A-B-A-B, what would be the denotation or the diction of this first 4 lines here? I'm reading it. It says, when in disgrace with fortune in men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate. Well,
It's kind of negative.
very negative. What Shakespeare is doing right here is, as he's setting up his poem to go over it, he's using very negative connotation with this word choice. He begins by even just the third word, disgrace, obviously casting a dark image on what the poem's going to begin like. He obviously will compound upon that by saying that he's beweeping his state. He's alone. He's crying to deaf heaven, who doesn't hear him, and he's even cursing his fate to that point. We can move on now to the poem on the third quatrain. There's a change in the diction, starting with the word yet, which actually ends up being a huge compliment to the poem because of this change. And he uses words like haply and arising and heavens, and he uses, as well in the heroic couplet, he uses the words sweet love, wealth, and kings. Obviously, there's a huge change in the feeling, the theme, the connotation of what the poem's trying to say here, just from the word choice from the first quatrain down to the last quatrain, which is important. Is there any other things you guys see here in the poem that we can talk about with diction? Any other word choices that you think are important, that help trying to really bring the theme along in this poem?
Well, also in the fourth quatrain it says, like the lark at break of day rising, so it just makes it sound like...
Exactly, it's a renewal. Exactly, at the end of the night, you can kind of see at the beginning of the poem, it's a dark image. He's standing, it's the end of the night, he's crying to heaven, nobody's able to hear him. But towards the end of the poem, the third quatrain, it's the morning. Everything's more bright. His state is very important. I like that word state, that's one thing I want to focus on. He uses the word state 3 times to make it kind of like a contrast between the 3. He uses it first in the outcast state, of which he is in line 2. He goes on in line 10 to say, happily I think at the end, and then my state. So he first is complimenting how, he's first is saying how outcast his state is, and kind of feeling a little bit bad for himself. Then once he starts beginning to think about his lover, to whom the poem is directed, he compares to what he has with that compared to his state. And he finishes down at the end with the last line, then I scorn to change my state with kings. So this state of which line 2 says that is the most outcast he could imagine at the end of the poem because of his thoughts upon the addressee of the poem, his lover. He would rather keep this outcast state than trade it away to be with a king, to be a king, because of the fact that he has this person in his life. So the word choice is something that's actually really, really important in this poem. It really helps us understand what he's trying to portray to us, and helps us understand what the idea is. Now, all the poetic devices that we talked about so far, and there's obviously tons of others, we could talk about how the rhyme scheme works, obviously. One thing I noticed, Dave, when you read it, when it says featured like him with friends, possessed, what would be a correct rhyme with possessed? Maybe obsessed, or other words like that.
Depressed.
Depressed, anything like that, thank you. And the line, though, that is designed to rhyme with it, line D, line 8, I'm sorry, it says, with what I most enjoy contented least. No, obviously those aren't the most applicable of rhymes. What that's actually called is a slant rhyme. When it's read correctly, you could say lest in that. So it'd be possessed and lest. The way that you read it is important to what the poet's trying to portray here. So obviously we can look at a couple other things, like at the end of line 2 and 3, there's not a comma.